Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Hello and welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz the Jadullo.
The impeachment crisis deepens with explosive testimony from America's top diplomat in Ukraine.
Hillary's back and she's still annoying lefty Democrats.
We'll sit down with a former Republican congresswoman. What was it really like dealing with Donald Trump, and would she vote to impeach him now?
There's no win-win situation. It's just lose-lose.
And I'll be digging up the dirt on Joe Biden's son Hunter, but I might need a bigger spade. Let's get going.
The inquiry into the possible impeachment of President Donald Trump heard damning evidence this week from the most senior US official in Ukraine.
In explosive testimony, Bill Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, personally implicates President Trump in a quid pro quo pressure campaign, describing in detail how Trump withheld military aid to force Ukraine to investigate his political rivals.
Taylor's 10 hours of testimony was in private session, but his 15-page opening statement was released, and it makes it increasingly difficult for the White House to deny a clear abuse of presidential power. 2 weeks ago, we got a preview when we saw a text message sent on the 1st of September by Taylor to EU Ambassador and Trump donor Gordon Sondland. In it, Taylor asked if security assistance to Ukraine, totaling close to $400 million, and a White House meeting are conditioned on investigations into Ukraine's role in the 2016 election and the role of the Bidens in the Burisma natural gas company. To which Sondland said, "Call me." According to Taylor's statement this week, in that subsequent phone call, Sondland went further, saying, quote, "Everything, including security assistance, was dependent on President Zelensky making a public announcement there would be an inquiry into 2016 and the Bidens. Not just an investigation, but a public declaration, because Trump wanted Zelensky put in, quote, a public box." Taylor reported accounts of phone calls between Sondland and Trump where Trump insisted there was no quid pro quo, while in the same breath insisting Zelensky announce he's investigating Biden and 2016 interference, and that Sondland told Zelensky and his aide, Andrei Yermak, that if there wasn't a public statement from Zelensky, they'd be at a stalemate, and Taylor took stalemate to mean Ukraine would not receive military assistance. The clock was ticking. The money needed to be sent by the end of September or expire with the end of the financial year. Taylor also recounted a call to Sondland on September the 8th when Sondland tried to explain Trump's thinking, saying that Trump is a businessman. When a businessman is about to sign a check to someone who owes him something, the businessman asks that person to pay up before signing the check. As far as Taylor is concerned, the quid pro quo there was clear. The military aid allocated by Congress was being held up against the national interests of both the United States and Ukraine. He details the way that Sondland, apparently acting on Trump's orders, subverted US foreign policy for domestic political reasons. This is the strongest evidence yet to support the central claim of the whistleblower complaint that triggered the impeachment inquiry late in September. President Trump's answer: Taylor, who served as Ukraine ambassador under George W. Bush, must be yet another one of these never-Trump Republicans.
Watch out for them. They are human scum.
And he had this message for his own staff.
It would be really great if the people within the Trump administration, all well-meaning and good, I hope, could stop hiring never-Trumpers.
Bill Taylor does seem to be an important witness, John, so you can expect more efforts like that to smear him. But it won't be easy, because the guy's got a military background. He first started working in government for Ronald Reagan, and he's been there ever since. As you said before, John, he was George W. Bush's Ukraine ambassador, and he was sent back to Ukraine by Secretary Pompeo. So Trump has tried a different defence, suggesting neither Taylor nor any other witness has provided testimony that the Ukrainians were even aware that military aid was being withheld. Now, firstly, that is an admission that military aid was indeed being withheld. But secondly, Taylor's statement clearly notes that on August 29, the Ukrainian chief negotiator was very concerned about withheld security assistance. And that furthermore, someone told that guy that the security assistance money would not come until the Ukrainian president committed to pursue the Burisma investigation. There's not much room for confusion there. You'll notice, by the way, that that quote, plus some of John's quotes from before, directly contradicts Sondland's testimony, in which he said, "I do not recall any discussions with the White House on withholding security assistance from Ukraine in return for assistance with the president's 2020 re-election campaign." Now that could be awkward for Sondland because it's not just Taylor's word against his. You see, Taylor took plenty of contemporaneous notes and memos. He said he shared those notes with the State Department and they have refused to make them available. So expect to hear more about those notes soon. Although Laura Ingraham made a fair point, I thought, about Taylor's testimony.
But most of it is third and fourth hand recounting of. He told him, and then he told him, and then the president told him, but I disagree with that. That's basically how it goes.
Look, it's true that all his juiciest material was second or third or fourth hand, but a lot of it came from NSC Russia and Europe Director Tim Morrison, and he is scheduled to testify next Thursday, so look out for that one. One more thing to look out for. CNN reports that on May 7, Zelensky's team discussed the pressure they were feeling to open corruption investigations into Burisma. That's not the important bit, though. The important bit is that this came 2 weeks after Zelensky and Trump first spoke on the phone, and that call has a transcript the White House has not released yet. Now, you're almost certainly going to be hearing about that again.
I reckon you're right. Well, certainly congressional Republicans have struggled to find a line of defence for the president's actions. Instead, they're tending to criticise the impeachment inquiry process itself by Democrats, which is currently hearing testimony in private. South Dakota Republican Senator John Thune went further than most when he conceded this week the picture coming out of it, based on the reporting we've seen, is, I would say, is not a good one. Then yesterday came this piece of political theatre from Republican House members led by Florida's Matt Gaetz.
Behind those doors, they intend to overturn the results of an American presidential election. We want to know what's going on. We're going to go and see if we can get inside. So let's see if we can get in.
And they did get inside the sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF room, a space where classified information can be shared with authorised personnel. It delayed testimony for a full 5 hours. They even sent out for pizza. It was quite a ridiculous stunt, really, as a dozen of the Republicans who stormed the facility were authorised to be in there anyway. Some did commit some fairly gross violations of security, though, by bringing mobile phones into the SCIF, which is forbidden. Despite the claims of secret hearings to overthrow the government by the likes of Matt Gaetz, it is important to understand Republican members of the House committees are also inside hearing evidence from the likes of Bill Taylor. Like the Democrats, they have counsel and they can ask questions. This is not unusual. And these rules were set by Republican Speaker John Boehner in 2015. There will be public hearings soon, and no doubt the same Republicans will condemn that as a show trial for the cameras, Chad.
Yeah, besides, during the Benghazi inquiry a few years back, Republicans didn't just hold private depositions, they largely also held private hearings. Committee Chair Trey Gowdy at the time said the private ones always produce better results.
What is unusual in all of this now, though, is that Matt Gaetz keeps trying to gate crash these hearings. He did it last week too, and this week he also smuggled an HBO film crew in on invalid credentials. So why does Gaetz keep doing this?
I love the president so much I may never love another president again.
Oh, well, that is sweet.
What a deeply, deeply serious man, John. But I do think that Republicans have a point about the process. At least Stefanik had this to say about transcripts for people on the actual committee that's holding these hearings.
There have only been 2 transcripts that have made available to Intelligence Committee members. The first is Kurt Volker's, the second is Ambassador Yovanovitch's. And you would have to read it with a member of Democratic staff. That is unprecedented and unfair.
Also, it's all very well to say there will eventually be public hearings, but while the Democrats are building their case right now, they really should let the Republicans build their defense right now. And Republicans can't do that unless they have the power to call their own hearings and subpoena their own witnesses. It's just basic fairness, especially when the inquiry is so delicately poised. If you look at just the 6 states that determined the 2016 election, they support the impeachment inquiry 50 to 45%. But as far as actual removal goes, they only favour that 43 to 53%. And don't think the Democrats aren't aware of that. Talking about Democrats, you might recall Anderson Cooper asked this question at the debate last week.
President Trump has falsely accused your son of doing something wrong while serving on a company board in Ukraine. I want to point out there's no evidence of wrongdoing by either one of you.
But is that really true, that the Bidens didn't do anything wrong? It's wall time!
Big, beautiful wall.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. Hunter Biden graduated from Yale Law School in 1996 and was immediately hired by Daddy Joe Biden as his deputy campaign manager. But it wasn't long until Hunter's immense talent was recognized by astute judges such as Delaware-based credit card company NBNA, who coincidentally were by far Joe Biden's biggest single source of political donations. Also, coincidentally, an executive from NBNA had just bought Joe Biden's house for the full $1.2 million asking price, while other similarly appraised houses at the time sold for $100,000 to $200,000 less than that price. Although, counterpoint, Joe Biden at one point did declare, "I am not the senator from NBNA." And that's always a good sign when someone has to say that. Anyway, Hunter got a job with NBNA pretty much fresh out of law school. And a little over a year later, he was NBNA's senior vice president. How about that? We'll come back to them later. Meanwhile, in 1998, Hunter asked one of his dad's old fundraisers, William Oldecker, for advice on how to get a job in the Clinton administration. So Oldecker called up another guy who worked on Biden's presidential campaign, who is now the Commerce Secretary, and surprise, surprise, Hunter got the job. And then when Clinton was on the way out, Hunter called this Oldecker guy again and asked to join his lobbying firm, and they loved Hunter there. Oh, as a guy who worked with him said, Hunter was great personally. He was very engaging, he was very curious, hardworking, also possibly relevant. He had a very strong last name that really paid off in terms of our lobbying efforts. So Hunter kept doing that while being placed on a consulting contract with NBNA. It's unclear how much exactly he earned there, but one official said he was on a $100,000 retainer, and Obama aides assured everyone, Anderson Cooper style, that there was nothing improper about the payments. Of course! And completely unrelated to Hunter's job and NBNA donations to Joe Biden, NBNA began pushing hard to make it tougher for people to discharge their debts through bankruptcies. And guess what? Joe Biden was one of the first Democrats to support the bankruptcy bill that would do this. He voted for it in 1998, 2000, 2001, and 2005 when it finally passed. And that was when he crossed swords with a well-known consumer advocate.
But Senator, if you're not going to fix that problem, you can't take away the last shred of protection for these families.
Okay. You're very good, Professor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Biden.
That could be the most condescending pat on the head ever.
But understand.
You did a hell of a job of your job.
Thank you.
Apart from that condescending pat on the head. Anyway, Hunter moved on from NBNA soon after that bill passed, and in 2006, he was appointed to the Board of Directors of Public Rail Service, Amtrak. Now, you might have thought Hunter wasn't really qualified for that position, but you'd be wrong, because the Senate specifically cited that Hunter had spent a lot of time on Amtrak trains, making him almost as qualified for that role as this guy. Also, in 2006, Hunter took over a hedge fund with Joe Biden's brother James called Paradigm, and on the very first day, an executive recalled James saying, "Don't worry about investors. We got people all around the world who want to invest in Joe Biden. We've got investors lined up in a line of 747s filled with cash." Now, the Bidens deny James ever said that. But regardless, they didn't run the hedge fund very well, including unwittingly hiring an attorney who had just been convicted on 12 counts of fraud. And the hedge fund was unwound in 2010 to 2013 when Hunter wanted to join a very special unit of the Navy, although not as special as that unit. Only 6 people were accepted in this unit, but somehow Hunter made the cut, despite requiring a waiver for his age and also a waiver for his history of cocaine use. Well, he was commissioned in May of 2013, and 1 month later, he failed a cocaine test. And that was it. And then we have a whole series of unfortunate headlines that I'm showing massive restraint and not bringing to you, by the way, involving drug use, alcohol, and marriage breakups, strippers, homeless people, dating his dead brother's wife. But look, let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the latest 2 Hunter Biden stories. Number 1.
When Biden's son walks out of China with $1.5 billion in a fund, and he's there for one quick meeting, and he flies in on Air Force 2, I think that's a horrible thing. I think it's a horrible thing.
Okay, Trump there is referring to an equity company that Hunter formed with his mates called BHR, which was registered only 12 days after Hunter had flown to Beijing with Joe Biden during an official vice presidential visit. Now, Hunter insists he did no business during that trip, but he says he did visit socially one of the multiple Chinese investors who ended up being part of that firm. So, sounds a little dodge. But that $1.5 billion figure of Trump's was just a fundraising target that the company once announced. It wasn't actual money. In actual fact, they only raised $4.2 million from the entire planet, which is around 1/4% of the amount that Trump keeps saying they raised from China alone. Biden's lawyer also says that Hunter was an unpaid board member until 9 months after Joe Biden wasn't vice president, at which time Hunter then acquired a 10% interest, and Hunter still hasn't received any return or capital or compensation from his investment or his position. Maybe Trump should be looking into MBNA instead. But finally, we've got Ukraine. Now, I've covered this a lot before on the show. There is no solid evidence that Joe or Hunter Biden did anything illegal when Joe pressured Ukraine to sack his chief prosecutor. The guy was notoriously corrupt, and he did not appear to be investigating Hunter Biden or Hunter Biden's company. But that does not mean that Bidens did nothing wrong. At the very least, John Kerry's son, who was part of Hunter's investment company at the time, told Hunter's business partner that working with a company as dodgy as Burisma was unacceptable, and that the lack of judgment in this matter led to Kerry's son ending his business relationship with Hunter completely. Also, according to records reviewed by Reuters, Hunter wasn't just paid $50,000 a month, which is a lot, by the way, but also for 18 months, he was also paid $83,000 extra per month for consulting services. Now, admittedly, he did apparently provide advice on legal issues, corporate finance and strategy, but still, there's a hell of a lot of money for someone who never visited Ukraine during his time on the board. And one more thing, just in case it wasn't obvious enough, Biden's advisors did discuss whether Hunter's work could be perceived as a conflict of interest for Joe Biden in Ukraine. Ya reckon? And one advisor was concerned enough to mention it to Biden himself. But clearly, the advisor's concerns were dismissed. So, there you go. You decide whether there's any evidence of wrongdoing from Hunter or Joe Biden.
Big, beautiful world.
By the way, I am aware that the Trump administration has their own record of graft, and I'll be looking at that in the next few weeks. This issue of self-dealing for politicians and their families should be above partisanship because it's everywhere. In 2012, 82 congressional members paid family members through their offices or campaigns. 44 had family members who lobbied, and 90 paid family businesses for services.
So there's a lot of it going around. Yes. But speaking of walls...
We're building a wall in Colorado. We're building a beautiful wall, a big one that really works, that you can't get over, you can't get under.
But that did come as a surprise to the people of Colorado because theirs is not a border state. The president later claimed to have been joking. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton injected herself into the 2020 campaign in a fairly remarkable way this week, effectively accusing Democratic presidential contender Tulsi Gabbard of working for Russia and eyeing a third-party spoiler campaign.
I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. That's assuming Jill Stein will give it up, which she might not, because she's also a Russian asset.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard was not too happy with that. She accused Hillary of playing a secret hand in the primary, and she issued this warning to other candidates.
But if they can falsely portray me as a traitor, then they can do it to anyone. If you stand up to the rich and powerful elite and the war machine, they will destroy you and discredit your message.
So fairly wild accusations flying on both sides, but at least Tulsi had a supporter in this guy.
Hillary Clinton, if you've heard of her, she's the one that's accusing everybody of being a Russian agent. Anybody that is opposed to her is a Russian agent.
Well, like Trump, Gabbard has raised a few eyebrows in the past for policy positions that are more in line with Russia's than America's. And some establishment Democrats still find her meeting with the Russian-backed Bashar al-Assad in Syria in 2017 hard to swallow. She also dismissed all Syrian opposition to Assad at the time as, quote, terrorists, and later expressed scepticism that Assad was even responsible for chemical weapons attacks.
Look, Gabbard definitely has some policy views that Russia would enjoy. Like, for instance, she was one of the few that voted against the Magnitsky sanctions imposed on Russia. But this is no mystery. She's a soldier who's passionately non-interventionist, except to defeat terrorism. And everyone's got policies that some other country agrees with. Obama wasn't an Iranian asset because he pushed the Iran nuclear deal.
Says you.
I suspect this might actually be a little bit personal.
Let's not forget, Tulsi Gabbard was picked out by the Democratic Party establishment and put at the top of the DNC. They thought she was going to be their golden girl. And she got in that position, the DNC, and she looked around. She saw Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other people, Clinton allies, doing stuff they shouldn't have been doing in the primary. And Tulsi publicly quit and then endorsed Bernie Sanders. And it's been payback hell ever since.
It's also a bit stupid because Gabbard has been dining out on this all week. She's been flogging it relentlessly on her Twitter account, trying to use it, I assume, to get into the campaign. I mean, look at this from Gabbard to Hillary. It's now clear that this primary is between you and me.
Really?
Yeah, right. Gabbard wishes she'd be on more than 1.3% if she was running against Hillary. But at least Gabbard has a platform to respond on. I feel sorry for Jill Stein, actually, who Hillary also gave a drive-by to. She accused her of being a Russian asset. Let's not forget, in 2016, Jill Stein spent a packet on lawsuits trying to secure recounts in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin so that Hillary might win.
That money probably came from Russia, though.
No, don't start. Leave it. That's our Hillary quote for 2019. Let's move on.
All right. The impeachment inquiry and the outcry over the US withdrawal from northern Syria seems to be taking a toll on the president's approval rating. According to the 538 average, 40.8% approve of President Trump's job performance, down from 43.1 on September 24, the day the impeachment inquiry was announced. Disapproval is up around 1.5%. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg got the biggest bounces following last week's fourth round debate in Ohio. The steady rise of Senator Elizabeth Warren may have stalled, at least for now. Senator Warren was at 23.4 the morning after the debate. That ticked up 0.5 point by the end of last week, but is now down 1.5 points. And that is despite a Quinnipiac poll putting her 7 points ahead of Biden. And that Q poll also had Mayor Pete surging up to 10%. In the averages, Biden is down more than 2. Overall, Biden's lead is 5.4 percentage points. Just over 3 months now until the influential first in the nation Iowa caucuses, and it's basically a tie at the top between Biden and Warren, with Pete Buttigieg emerging as a real bolter. That, according to a Suffolk poll released on Monday, Pete was moving into third spot within 5 points of Biden overall. A poll on the weekend, meanwhile, from Emerson had Pete 7 points behind the frontrunners. But then, looky this, from Iowa State University earlier today, Elizabeth Warren is leading by 8, then Pete, then Bernie, with Joe Biden's support collapsing to just 12%. And a flicker of life there for Amy Klobuchar on 4%.
And you can tell Buttigieg is at least becoming a factor, because here comes the Oppo. It seems America's least popular guy, Mark Zuckerberg, sent Buttigieg's campaign manager multiple emails with names that he might consider hiring. And then Buttigieg hired 2 of them. Not really a big deal, but the fact that that story dropped now suggests that Buttigieg is starting to worry someone.
Yeah, I think those two have some history, don't they? Went to college together or something. Well, guess who is a lot less relevant than Pete Buttigieg? It's Congressman Tim Ryan, who is certainly not going to be president. He has officially ended his presidential campaign earlier today. In the past century, only one sitting vice president has come to the top job through an election. That was George Bush. A second, former VP Richard Nixon, also won election in his own right. But a total of 6 VPs have tried and failed to win the White House. And nobody tried and failed quite as many times as one Hubert Humphrey. August 27, 1964, the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey. President Lyndon Johnson has served 9 months without a deputy after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He's about to announce his choice of vice presidential running mate. He draws out his decision, teasing the delegates.
My trusted colleague, Senator Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota.
Hubert Humphrey was already a hero of the progressive movement. He'd been fighting segregation since the 1940s and was a driving force behind the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Thank you, my fellow Democrats.
Humphrey was a northern progressive to balance Johnson, who was from Texas and more popular with conservatives. In the shadow of the Kennedy killing, Johnson had also chosen somebody he felt best suited to take over from him at any time. And these were some of the darkest days of the Cold War. On top of that, President Johnson was not a well man. He'd suffered his first heart attack 9 years earlier and had an angina attack the night he was sworn in as president. For Hubert Humphrey, who'd long had his eyes on the presidency, serving with Johnson was something of a devil's bargain. He'd been massively outspent in the presidential primaries by Kennedy in 1960.
Posters in Milwaukee compete for voter support.
Posters just didn't cut it. Losses to Kennedy in Wisconsin and West Virginia convinced Humphrey that without personal wealth, his best path to the White House was through the vice presidency. And soon he was on his way. Johnson and Humphrey won the 1964 election over Republicans Barry Goldwater and Bill Miller in a landslide.
I, Hubert Horatio Humphrey, do solemnly swear.
Before picking Humphrey as his running mate, Johnson had demanded his unswerving loyalty. In 1965, Humphrey wrote the president a memo urging him to withdraw American forces from Vietnam. It's always hard to cut losses, Humphrey wrote, but the Johnson administration is in a stronger position to do so now than any administration in this century. 1965 is the year of minimum political risk. Turns out the risk was to Hubert. Johnson hit the roof. He felt betrayed and ordered Humphrey to butt out of Vietnam policy and banned him from the Oval Office. Hubert Humphrey was in the doghouse, silenced on liberal issues, including the war. It prompted satirist Tom Lehrer to ask,
"Whatever became of Hubert? Has anyone heard a thing?"
Eventually, the phone did ring and Hubert Humphrey was deployed to gather support for the escalation of the war, his tour taking in South Vietnam, Japan and Australia.
After talks at Parliament House, Mr Humphrey attends a state dinner at the Hotel Canberra and then holds a joint press conference with Prime Minister Holt. Mr Holt says Australia is considering sending more troops to South Vietnam.
To many progressives, Humphrey had sold out, so when Johnson decided not to seek a second term in 1968, Humphrey's campaign to succeed him was vulnerable on the left. First, Eugene McCarthy, then Bobby Kennedy ran opposing the war, but with a second Kennedy assassination, Humphrey's nomination was assured.
I proudly accept the nomination of our party.
20 years after Hubert Humphrey had become a progressive hero for championing civil rights, his support for Johnson's policies in Vietnam made him a Liberal pariah. The Chicago Convention saw police attacking protesters, delegates attacking each other. Humphrey inherited a deeply divided party.
Our task is tremendous, and I need your help.
And Hubert Humphrey was also vulnerable on the right. His Republican opponent this time was former Vice President Richard Nixon. The Soviet Union was so concerned about a staunch anti-communist like Nixon coming to power, they made an extraordinary approach. Over breakfast with Vice President Humphrey, the Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin later revealed he'd offered Humphrey any conceivable help in his election campaign, including financial aid. Humphrey rejected the illegal offer, but it's not like he didn't need some help with his campaign, as well as Nixon. Humphrey also had to contend with segregationist Alabama Governor George Wallace skimming away Southern votes. With Liberal and Conservative Democrats unhappy with Humphrey, little wonder his polls sank into the 20s by September. Humphrey, the happy warrior, was sounding decidedly cranky.
Whether he can be his own man and all that cheap journalistic bunk. But let's get this argument elevated.
It was at that low point that Hubert Humphrey finally became his own man again and broke with President Johnson, calling for a halt to bombing in northern Vietnam. And through October, the polls started to tighten. The Wallace campaign faltered. Hubert Humphrey hit his stride. Nixon's 15-point lead shrank to 8, and then 1. Then Lyndon Johnson delivered an October surprise.
I speak to you this evening about very important developments.
The president announced an immediate end to US bombing in North Vietnam, hoping to boost Hubert Humphrey's chances, but in the end, in a close election, it just wasn't enough.
I have done my best. I have lost. Mr. Nixon has won. So now let's get on with the urgent task of uniting our country. Thank you.
Mia Love first came to national attention in the United States when, as mayor of Saratoga Springs, Utah, she gave a barn burner of a speech at the 2012 Republican convention nominating Mitt Romney to run against Barack Obama for the presidency. Mia Love was running herself for Congress at the time, and she launched a memorable attack on Obama.
His policies have failed us. We're not better off than we were 4 years ago, and no rhetoric, bumper sticker, or Hollywood campaign ad can change that.
Still, Romney lost, so did Mia, but 2 years later she was elected to represent Utah's 4th District, becoming the first ever black female Republican elected to Congress. And for many at the time, she represented the future of the Republican Party. Then along came Donald Trump, and in 2016, Congresswoman Love was among those who condemned Trump's boasting about sexual assault, and she refused to vote for him. Once in office, though, they did work together on a number of issues, but when she narrowly lost re-election last November, President Trump had a bit of a score to settle.
But Mia Love gave me no love, and she lost. Too bad. Sorry about that, Mia.
Well, Mia Love is in Australia at the moment as a senior fellow at the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney, and she stopped by the Foval office for a fireside chat. Mia Love, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So let me take you back to October 2016. The Access Hollywood tape has just come out, and you call for Donald Trump to drop out of the presidential race. You say you cannot vote for this man. Why that controversy as opposed to some of the others that we saw during that campaign?
I just felt like the comments were incredibly vulgar, and it, to me, signaled a lack of respect for women, and I really couldn't get past it, or at least I was able to take it and tuck it in the back of my head and say, at least I know who I'm dealing with.
A month later, he's president-elect of the United States. Was that a surprise to you and others who'd condemned him?
Well, I think it was a surprise to everyone, even his supporters. I think it was a surprise to his supporters. I remember sitting down, we were having our own campaign. I was in my own campaign headquarters, and we're watching the TV, and we see the Hillary Clinton headquarters, and we see the Donald Trump headquarters, and both of them were silent. Both of them we were just looking, and they were just like, what just happened? You know, you've got one group that was like, oh my gosh, what just happened? We just lost. And the other that said, oh my gosh, what just happened? We just won. So it was really eerie, because typically you see the winning headquarters just cheering and, you know, a lot of confetti. There was a lot of just silent shock. So I think it was surprising for everyone, because all of the polls were telling us that Hillary was going to win, and was going to win big.
And then he calls you.
Yeah. He did. I was sitting in my office, and here we have a new president, and I have to do everything I can to just get things done. And my executive assistant comes in, and she says, the president's on the phone. And I was just like, who? Which one? And she said, President-elect Donald Trump's on the phone. And he just said, Mia, I just want you to know I'm proud of you. You're a winner, and and it was actually pretty. It was kind, and I remember specifically thinking, I didn't get this phone call 2 years ago, as I became the first Black woman to become a member of Congress on the Republican side by President Obama. So it was kind of shocking to me that I got that call from the president-elect at the time, Trump, and I didn't get the call 2 years ago when I first became a member from President Barack Obama.
Do you think Trump was aware that you'd voted for Mike Pence?
I don't know. and well, I do think he was aware at some point. I was in the White House, in the Oval Office, and there was a time where he said, you know, she wasn't with us. She wasn't with us at the beginning. So he kept saying that. So I think he was aware, actually. I think he was aware that I had some issues, as many people did, and I didn't shy away from that. I was just like, well, you know, you did say some things.
As a congressional rep, what's Trump like to work with? What's he like behind the scenes? There are different instances that I've worked with him where it was fantastic. And then there are others where I was trying to do everything I can to help. Helping the president do his job only helps my district and helps America. So I wanted him to be successful. One instance is after he called Haiti an asshole country. I went to him and I said, what are you doing? These are people who actually were supportive of you in places, particularly like Miami, that didn't really like the Clintons because of the Clinton Foundation. So they felt really horrible that the president would say this. So I wanted to help, and I couldn't get through. It was just like, oh, don't worry about it. They love me. We're going to be okay. It was just like, can I help you with immigration reform? Because that would be helpful to that community. It'd be helpful to you and great for this country. Let me help you with that. I was literally begging. But there's another instance where he helped bring Joshua Holt, an American prisoner in my district, home from Venezuela, who was there for a year and a half. The State Department was fantastic. And at that point, he had released or helped secure the release of 19 prisoners, and it just seemed like he just went forth with that and was really good with helping in that.
But he expected gratitude, and that led to you describing him as transactional. What other evidence did you see of these of transactional nature?
Well, that particular one, I said thank you. I was there on TV with him. I praised the State Department and the White House for helping us bring Joshua home. I don't know what else he wanted. I'm not really sure. And if there was something else, he probably should have asked me, and I would have told him if it was going to be okay or not. But it's not just my experiences with him. There are many times where I have seen the president say one thing to a member of the House of Representatives, and he expects 100% loyalty, and doesn't feel like he really has to. give it back. And I'm not saying that in a way to be mean or to criticize, but he believes that that seat is not expendable where the others are. He believes that his seat is the most important seat. So everybody else is.
There were times, Mia, when, certainly viewed from this distance, that the Trump White House looked quite chaotic and was constantly taking not just the media, but also members of the Republican Party by surprise.
Yeah.
What was that period like? What were the biggest surprises, the most unsettling changes in course when you really didn't know from one day to the next what the president or his administration was thinking?
Immigration reform. For me, hands down, it was immigration reform. We had the president come in and say, hey, just give me something to sign. The next day, Tuesday, he sends a tweet out. I don't support any of this. I don't know who says that we support this. I don't support any of this. I'm on the phone with Carlos Curbelo, and I'm like, wait a minute. We had all of this support for this. What's going on? They called the White House, and the next day on Wednesday, there was supposed to be the White House picnic. He canceled the White House picnic, and he said, you guys need to work on immigration reform. This was within 3 days. So it was just one way, the other, one way, and the other. And so I don't know if it was some of the political talk heads like Ann Coulter, or if somebody was getting in his ear and talking to him, but it was just kind of a back and forth that you had no, it was chaotic for us. That's exactly what it was, chaotic.
Can you imagine if you were there today, would you be like Congressman Rooney, considering supporting the Democrat impeachment inquiry? Would you be opposing it? Would you be keeping an open mind? How would you be looking at it?
No, I would not support it right now. It's not. You can't impeach someone because you don't like him. You can't impeach somebody because of what they say, which is mainly the biggest part. The biggest issue that I have with him is, as a president, you have to represent everyone, and if you don't like someone, you at least should pretend like you do. I think that his language is really disruptive and is going to create this, what I fear the most, and that is us destroying each other in the United States. That being said, impeachment is quite serious. It's been done twice in our history. And the process in which it's being done, there is no vote on the floor. That, to me, is a big issue, because the branch of government that's closest to people is the House of Representatives. And as a former member of Congress, if I wasn't allowed to vote on the floor, that meant that the people that I represent didn't have a voice in the House of Representatives. If you are shutting the public out of the process, that's a big deal. And to go along with that, they're completely shutting Republicans out of the process. So they're not part of the investigation. They decide what the purviews are, they decide what the rules are, and they kind of go through it on their own. The other thing also is this is something that impeachment is, there's no win-win situation. It's just lose-lose. And I think it's going to create even more of an instability. So you have to be, it's a last resort, and you have to be very, even though it's a political process, and it's constitutional for the Speaker of the House to be doing this, I don't think it'll be good for the country, and I don't think that there is enough right now for that.
Well, Mia Love, so good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been another action-packed week, but we're right out of time for another edition of Planet America.
We've got a whole lot more Mia Love, plus our Planet America Extra on YouTube, iView, and Facebook right there. See you there.
Bye-bye.